Everyone wants to be surrounded by people, until life reveals who was only standing there because you were useful. A billionaire CEO spent millions planning the perfect birthday. Politicians accepted the invitations. Business partners promised they'd come. Even her own family said they wouldn't miss it. But when the night finally arrived, every chair remained empty. Everyone had abandoned her. Everyone except one struggling single father carrying a small bouquet of flowers. What happened next would leave the entire city questioning what success is really worth. If you've ever wondered whether people truly love you or simply love what you can do for them, this story is for you. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this remind us that the smallest act of kindness can outshine a lifetime of success. Now, let's begin. There are two kinds of silence: the peaceful kind that helps you think, and the painful kind that forces you to realize you're completely alone. Olivia Bennet had spent most of her life avoiding the second one, until the night of her 55th birthday. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Fresh white orchids decorated every table. A string quartet quietly played near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city skyline. The birthday cake stood almost 6 feet tall. 3 professional photographers waited beside it. A live television crew had already set up cameras. Everything had been prepared for one unforgettable celebration. There was only one problem. No one was there to celebrate. Rows of perfectly decorated tables stretched across the room. Every chair remained empty. Hundreds of untouched wine glasses sparkled beneath the lights. Waiters stood awkwardly along the walls, checking their watches, looking toward the entrance every few minutes. Surely, someone would arrive. No one did. Olivia sat quietly in her wheelchair near the enormous birthday cake. Her royal blue dress had been custom-made for the evening. Diamond earrings reflected the chandelier light. Her blonde hair had been styled hours earlier. She looked exactly like the cover of a business magazine, except her eyes told a completely different story. She wasn't looking toward the cameras. She wasn't looking at the cake. She kept looking at the entrance, waiting, still believing the next elevator would bring the first guest. Her assistant, Grace, glanced at her phone again. Nothing. No messages. No calls. Only excuse after excuse. Running late. Something came up. Rain check. Some didn't even bother replying. Grace quietly locked the screen before Olivia could see it. How many? Olivia asked softly. Grace hesitated. What? How many have canceled? Grace forced a smile. A few. Olivia looked out at the empty ballroom. You've never been able to lie to me. Grace slowly lowered her eyes. They all canceled. The words lingered in the air. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Olivia simply nodded. I see. No tears. No anger. Just acceptance. Some disappointments arrive so quietly, you don't even have the strength to react. 3 years earlier, none of this would have happened. Back then, Olivia Bennet wasn't just one of the country's richest CEOs. She was unstoppable. Her technology company employed nearly 60,000 people across 4 continents. Presidents requested meetings with her. Magazine covers called her the Iron Woman of business. Every charity gala wanted her attendance. Every politician wanted a photograph beside her. Every investor wanted 5 minutes of her time. Her calendar had been booked 18 months in advance. She couldn't eat lunch alone if she tried. Then, one rainy evening changed everything. The accident happened on a mountain highway. A truck lost control around a blind corner. Olivia's driver swerved to avoid a family crossing the road. The limousine crashed through the guardrail. The family survived. So did Olivia, but her spine didn't. When she woke up in the hospital, the doctors delivered the kind of news no amount of money could erase. She would never walk again. The newspapers covered the story for weeks. Television hosts called her courageous. Politicians visited the hospital. Executives sent flowers. Social media overflowed with support. For a while, she believed she wasn't facing the journey alone. Then, the cameras left. The headlines disappeared. And so did almost everyone else. Board members stopped visiting. Friends became too busy. Dinner invitations quietly disappeared. People who once waited months for 10 minutes with Olivia suddenly couldn't spare 10 minutes for her. At first, she made excuses for them. They're working. They're traveling. They'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow slowly became next week. Next week became next month. Then, nothing. There was one conversation she could never forget. About a year after the accident, she had called someone she'd considered her closest friend for nearly 20 years. "I miss talking to you." There was a long silence. Finally, her friend answered, "You've changed, Olivia." Olivia smiled sadly. "I can't walk. I didn't become another person." The response still echoed in her memory. "No, but everything around you did." The call ended 3 minutes later. They never spoke again. Grace gently adjusted the blanket, covering Olivia's legs. "Would you like me to cancel the photographers?" Olivia kept staring toward the entrance. "Not yet." The television crew. "Not yet." The musicians. Olivia smiled faintly. "They're already here. They deserve to be paid." Grace nodded. She'd worked for Olivia for 11 years, long enough to know the woman sitting in that wheelchair wasn't holding on because she expected people to come. She was holding on because she wasn't ready to admit they wouldn't. At exactly 7:30 p.m., the ballroom doors opened. Every waiter looked up. Grace smiled hopefully. Even Olivia instinctively straightened in her wheelchair. A man stepped inside. Not a politician, not an executive, not a celebrity, just a tired-looking father in a black jacket, holding a modest bouquet of white and blue flowers. He looked around the enormous ballroom, then quietly asked the nearest waiter, "Excuse me, am I too late?" Every head in the ballroom turned toward the man standing at the entrance. For a moment, nobody answered, not because they didn't hear him, because they weren't expecting. Someone, anyone. He stood there awkwardly, holding a modest bouquet of white and blue flowers, wrapped in simple brown paper. Nothing expensive, nothing extravagant, just flowers someone had clearly chosen with care. His black jacket had seen better days. His shoes were clean, but worn, the kind of shoes that had walked thousands of miles, trying to provide for a family. Grace quickly walked toward him. "Can I help you?" The man smiled politely. "I hope so. I think I'm here for a birthday." Grace looked around the empty ballroom. A sad smile crossed her face. "So are we." The man glanced at the untouched tables, the untouched cake, the musicians quietly playing to an audience of almost no one. His smile slowly disappeared. He looked back at Grace. "Did they change the venue?" Grace quietly shook her head. "No, they changed their minds." The words hung in the air. The man looked across the ballroom. His eyes finally landed on Olivia, sitting alone in her wheelchair, perfectly dressed, completely alone. He looked back at Grace. Nobody came. She swallowed. "No." He looked toward the entrance behind him, as though expecting dozens of guests to suddenly walk in. Nobody did. He stood there quietly for several seconds, almost unsure what to do next. Finally, he held up the bouquet. "I brought these." Grace looked at the flowers, then at him. "They're beautiful. They're not much. They're more than she received from anyone else tonight." The man scratched the back of his neck. "I don't actually know her." Grace blinked. "You don't?" He smiled awkwardly. "No." "Then, why are you here?" He reached into his jacket and carefully unfolded a slightly crumpled invitation. "I found this." Grace frowned. "Found it?" "It was lying beside a trash bin outside my apartment building yesterday." She looked at the invitation. It was genuine. Heavy cream-colored cardstock, gold lettering, Olivia Bennett's 55th birthday celebration. Grace stared at it. Someone hadn't simply declined. Someone had thrown it away. "I thought," the man continued, "maybe somebody accidentally dropped it. So I picked it up." He smiled sheepishly. "My daughter says people lose important things all the time." Grace looked down, unable to speak. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "I figured whoever invited me would realize the mistake." He looked toward Olivia again. "But then I thought, if someone invited me to celebrate with them, I wouldn't want them eating birthday cake alone." Grace felt her throat tighten. She'd spent all evening reading messages from wealthy executives, powerful politicians, influential celebrities. Every one of them had an excuse. Yet somehow, the only person who had shown up was a man who wasn't even invited. "What's your name?" Grace asked quietly. "Daniel." "And your daughter?" "Sophie." "How old is she?" 8. Grace smiled through watery eyes. The same age Olivia's granddaughter would have been. Daniel noticed the sadness in her voice. "Would have?" Grace nodded slowly. "Her son." She stopped herself. That's her story to tell. Daniel didn't ask another question. Some wounds didn't need curiosity. They needed respect. Across the ballroom, Olivia watched the conversation from a distance. She couldn't hear the words, only saw the stranger holding flowers. She leaned slightly toward the musicians. They finally came. One violinist quietly lowered his eyes. He couldn't bring himself to tell her. It was only one person. Grace walked back toward Olivia. Daniel followed a few steps behind. Each step seemed slower than the last. He suddenly felt like he didn't belong. What was he doing here? This woman was one of the richest people in the country. He was just a warehouse supervisor, raising an 8-year-old daughter on his own. Maybe he should leave. Before he could turn around, Olivia smiled at him. A genuine smile. The first one she'd given all evening. "You must be Daniel." He looked surprised. "Grace told you." Olivia nodded. She did. Daniel walked closer, holding the bouquet with both hands. "I know these probably aren't the kind of flowers people usually bring you." Olivia looked at the bouquet for several seconds, then back at him. "They're exactly the kind." He frowned. "I don't understand." She smiled softly. "They're the first flowers anyone has brought me today." Daniel carefully handed them to her. She held them as though they were priceless, not because of what they cost, because of what they represented. Someone had thought she was worth showing up for. She looked up at him. "You said you found the invitation." "I did. You could have ignored it." "I could have. You could have thrown it away." "I almost did." "What changed your mind?" Daniel smiled. "My daughter." Olivia tilted her head. "What did she say?" Daniel laughed quietly. "She looked at the invitation, then looked at me, and said something I couldn't argue with." Olivia smiled. "What was it?" Daniel looked at the flowers in her hands, then answered. She said, "Dad, nobody deserves to celebrate their birthday alone." For the first time that evening, the tears Olivia had been holding back finally escaped, not because of the flowers, not because of the birthday, but because a little girl she'd never met had cared more about her loneliness than everyone she'd spent decades helping. Daniel immediately looked uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you." Olivia quickly wiped away the tears and laughed softly. "No, you reminded me that I can still cry." Grace smiled. She hadn't seen Olivia cry since the accident. Not at the funeral, not during months of painful rehabilitation, not even when doctors told her she'd never walk again. Olivia had always carried herself like steel. Tonight, one little sentence from an 8-year-old had done what tragedy never could. It had reached her heart. Daniel shifted awkwardly. "I should probably leave." Olivia looked surprised. "So soon?" He glanced around the enormous ballroom. "I wasn't invited. You've probably got important guests coming." Grace quietly lowered her eyes. Daniel immediately realized what he'd said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Olivia gently interrupted him. "No, you meant well." She looked toward the hundreds of empty chairs. "There aren't any important guests coming." Daniel followed her gaze. It was almost painful to look at. A ballroom designed for 300 people, occupied by 6 waiters, 4 musicians, 3 photographers, a television crew, Grace, and 1 stranger holding an empty bouquet wrapper. Olivia smiled gently. "Would you do me a favor?" Daniel nodded. "If I can, sit with me." He blinked. "That's all." She laughed. "That's all." Daniel hesitated. "I don't think I belong at your table." Olivia looked him in the eyes. "Neither does anyone else tonight." The answer left him speechless. Grace quietly pulled out a chair beside Olivia. Daniel slowly sat down. The chair squeaked loudly in the silent ballroom. For some reason, that ordinary sound made the room feel less empty. One of the waiters cautiously approached. "Dinner, ma'am." Olivia looked at Daniel. "Hungry?" He laughed nervously. "I actually skipped lunch." She smiled. "So did I." The waiter looked relieved. "For two?" Olivia shook her head. "No." He looked confused. There were 300 meals prepared. She looked toward the kitchen. "Bring everyone." The waiter frowned. "Everyone?" She smiled. "The musicians, the photographers, the television crew, the cleaning staff, the kitchen, security downstairs. If they're working tonight, they're eating with us." Within minutes, the ballroom began changing. Waiters, who had spent the evening standing against walls, finally sat down. The musicians carefully put away their instruments and joined the tables. The photographers lowered their cameras. Even the television crew accepted plates after initially refusing. For the first time all evening, people weren't working. They were sharing a meal. Daniel looked around in amazement. "I've never seen anything like this." Olivia smiled. "Neither have I." Dinner arrived. Perfectly cooked steak, fresh seafood, roasted vegetables, homemade bread, desserts worth more than Daniel usually spent on groceries in a week. He looked at the plate, then quietly laughed. "What?" Olivia asked. "I'm trying to figure out which fork I'm supposed to use." Several people nearby chuckled. Olivia looked at the row of silverware, then picked up the smallest spoon. "I've honestly never known either." Daniel laughed harder. "You?" She shrugged. "I usually copied whoever sat next to me." The entire table burst into laughter. For the first time that night, the ballroom sounded like a birthday party. As dinner continued, conversation replaced silence. One violinist talked about teaching music to children on weekends. A chef proudly described spending 12 hours decorating the cake. One of the camera operators admitted he'd never actually tasted food at the luxury events he filmed. Daniel listened more than he spoke. It reminded him of family dinners before life became complicated. Olivia watched him quietly. "You've been raising your daughter alone for a while." Daniel nodded. 6 years. She looked surprised. "So long." "My wife passed away." The table fell silent. Daniel smiled gently. "Cancer." Sophie was only 2. Olivia quietly lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." "So was I." He smiled. "But Sophie didn't let me stay sad for long." Olivia looked toward the city lights beyond the windows. "I had a son." Daniel looked at her. The room became completely silent. Grace slowly reached for Olivia's hand. "You don't have to." Olivia smiled faintly. "I think it's time." She took a slow breath. "My son, Ethan, stopped speaking to me 8 years ago." Daniel frowned. "What happened?" Olivia stared at the birthday cake. "I chose board meetings over birthdays, conference calls over school plays, business trips over family dinners. I kept telling myself, I'm doing this for him." She smiled sadly. One day, he stopped believing me. Nobody interrupted. Nobody reached for their phones. Nobody even touched their food. Olivia continued quietly. When I had my accident, I thought he'd come. He didn't. Daniel gently asked, "Have you spoken since?" She slowly shook her head. Not once. The words hit the table harder than anything she'd said all evening. Daniel suddenly understood. This wasn't just a woman abandoned by business partners. She was a mother, still waiting for a son who had never come home. Just then, Grace's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Her expression immediately changed. Olivia noticed. "What is it?" Grace hesitated, then quietly turned the phone around. A notification from a major news outlet had just appeared. Breaking news. Billionaire CEO's birthday disaster goes viral after guests boycott celebration. Attached to the article was a photo taken less than an hour earlier. It showed Olivia sitting alone in her wheelchair, surrounded by hundreds of empty chairs. And the story was only beginning. The notification stayed on Grace's phone. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached for it. Because everyone already knew. Once the internet tells a story, it rarely waits for the truth. Grace reluctantly opened the article. She wished she hadn't. The headline was bad enough. The comments were worse. Guess money can't buy friends. She probably deserved it. This is karma for another billionaire. Feel sorry for the staff, not her. Rich people finally getting a taste of loneliness. Thousands of comments, millions of views. Less than an hour. Not one of those people knew Olivia. Not one of them had ever spoken to her. Yet every single one already had an opinion. Grace quietly locked her phone. Olivia smiled sadly. "Let me guess." Grace hesitated. "It's not important." Olivia looked at her. "If it's hurting you, it's probably about me." Grace slowly handed her the phone. Olivia read the headline, then the comments. She didn't defend herself. She didn't get angry. She simply handed the phone back. "I suppose everyone loves watching someone fall." Daniel had been silent. He wasn't reading the comments. He was reading Olivia. There was something different about the way she'd reacted. Most people would have defended themselves, explained, argued. She hadn't done any of that. She looked almost guilty. He finally asked the question everyone else was afraid to ask. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia nodded. "Anything." Daniel leaned forward. "Did you deserve any of it?" The room became completely silent. Even the waiters stopped walking. Olivia looked out at the city lights. For a long time, she didn't answer. Finally, she spoke. "Some of it." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She folded her hands in her lap. "I wasn't a cruel person, but I wasn't always a present one." She looked toward the untouched birthday cake. "When my company was struggling, I told myself every sacrifice was temporary. One more late meeting, one more business trip, one more missed birthday, one more canceled vacation." She smiled bitterly. There was always one more. I convinced myself I was building a future for the people I loved. She paused. "I never noticed. They needed me in the present." Daniel thought about Sophie. Every promise he'd made, every school play he'd attended, every bedtime story, not because life was easy, because he knew children remembered time, not money. Olivia continued. When Ethan was 12, he asked me to come watch him play the piano. I promised I would. She laughed quietly. I even bought flowers. Daniel looked up. Did you go? She slowly shook her head. A merger meeting ran late. I called afterward. I told him, I'll make it up to you. She smiled sadly. He said something I'll never forget. Grace quietly wiped away another tear. She'd heard the story before, but it never hurt less. Olivia stared at the candles on the birthday cake. He said, Mom, you always promise me tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for their drinks. The words settled over the ballroom. Heavy, painfully familiar. Daniel quietly nodded. My daughter says something similar. Olivia looked at him. When I tell her I'll be home early, she doesn't ask what time anymore. She just asks, Are you sure? He smiled. And every time she asks, it reminds me. She's keeping track. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. You've learned something. That took me 55 years. Just then, one of the photographers approached their table. He looked nervous. Ms. Bennett. She smiled politely. Yes, He held up his camera. I took hundreds of photos tonight. She nodded. I know. I don't think I should publish them. She looked surprised. Why not? He swallowed. Because the world only sees one picture. The lonely billionaire. But he looked around the ballroom. They won't see this. He gestured toward the musicians laughing with the chefs. The waiters sharing stories with the camera crew. Daniel smiling while cutting birthday cake. They won't see the birthday that actually happened. Olivia smiled. Maybe that's because it's not the story people want. The photographer frowned. What do you mean? She looked at the phone, still lying on the table. People love tragedy. They love failure. They love humiliation. She glanced around the room. But kindness, she smiled at Daniel, rarely goes viral. Daniel quietly reached into his pocket. He pulled out an old phone. The screen was cracked. He looked at the photographer. Can I see one picture? The photographer nodded and handed him the camera. Daniel scrolled through dozens of heartbreaking images. Olivia alone, empty tables, the untouched cake. Then he stopped. A new photo, taken only minutes earlier. Olivia laughing, the musicians laughing, the chefs laughing, everyone gathered around one table. It looked like a family. Daniel smiled. That's the one. The photographer frowned. What? Tell that story. Before anyone could respond, Grace's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her eyes widened. Olivia. Olivia looked up. Who is it? Grace didn't answer immediately. She simply turned the phone around. The caller ID showed two words that made Olivia's heart stop. Itia Chayan Biananititi. Her son was calling for the first time in 8 years. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the musicians stopped talking. The ringtone seemed impossibly loud inside the ballroom. Grace looked at Olivia. Her hands were trembling. Should I answer? Olivia stared at the screen. She had imagined this moment thousands of times. Driving home from work, lying awake at night, sitting through endless board meetings. She had rehearsed what she'd say. "I'm sorry. I miss you. Please give me another chance." Now, she couldn't remember a single word. The phone rang again, and again. Grace whispered, "Olivia, it's your decision." Olivia slowly reached for the phone. She took one deep breath, then pressed accept. Neither of them spoke. For several long seconds, there was only breathing on both ends of the call. Finally, a man's voice broke the silence. "Happy birthday, Mom." Olivia closed her eyes. The sound of his voice, older, calmer, still familiar. It felt like hearing a song she'd forgotten she loved. "Thank you," she whispered. There was another pause. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." Olivia gave a quiet laugh. "I've been waiting 8 years for this phone call." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He sounded nervous, like someone trying to speak to a stranger who used to be family. "I saw the news." Olivia looked toward Grace's phone. So did everyone else. "I saw the empty ballroom." "I'm sorry." She smiled sadly. "So am I. I almost didn't call," he admitted. Olivia felt her heart sink. "But," he continued, "my daughter was watching television with me." Olivia frowned. He smiled softly. "Your granddaughter." The entire room disappeared. Olivia heard nothing else. Only those 2 words. "Your granddaughter." Tears immediately filled her eyes. I have a granddaughter." "You do?" "She's 7. Olivia covered her mouth. 7. She'd missed 7 birthdays, 7 Christmas mornings, 7 first days of school, 7 years. She could never get back. "What?" Her voice broke. "What's her name?" "Lily." Olivia smiled through tears. "That's your grandmother's name." "I know. I named her after her." Daniel quietly looked away. Some moments were too personal to witness. He stared out the window instead, thinking about Sophie, thinking about how quickly time disappeared. Olivia finally managed to ask, "Does she know about me?" Ethan laughed softly. "Every night." Olivia frowned. "What?" "I've told her stories about you." She looked stunned. "You have?" "I told her how you built a company from nothing, how you worked harder than anyone I've ever met, how smart you are." He paused. "I never wanted her to hate you." Olivia couldn't stop crying now. "I thought you hated me." There was a long silence. Finally, "I was hurt," he answered honestly. "There's a difference." Daniel slowly lowered his head. That sentence hit him harder than anything he'd heard all evening. Ethan continued, "I spent years angry. Then Lily started asking questions. Why doesn't Grandma visit? Why don't we see her? I realized if I kept carrying my anger, she'd inherit it." Olivia wiped another tear away. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," he answered quietly. "You don't." The ballroom became completely silent. Then he continued, "But forgiveness isn't about what someone deserves. It's about deciding that the pain has lasted long enough." Olivia couldn't speak. Every person in the room felt the weight of those words. Even the photographers quietly lowered their cameras. This wasn't a moment for pictures. It was a moment for healing. Ethan cleared his throat. I actually called for another reason. Olivia smiled through tears. What is it? My daughter wants to talk to you. Olivia froze. A tiny voice came onto the line. Hello. Olivia smiled so widely, her cheeks hurt. Hello. The little voice giggled. Daddy says you're my grandma. Olivia laughed through tears. He does. Is it your birthday? Yes. Happy birthday. Thank you, sweetheart. There was a short pause. Then Lily asked, Did you have fun at your party? The question landed like a stone. Olivia looked around the ballroom. At Daniel, at Grace, at the musicians, at the chefs laughing together, at the staff who had become guests. She smiled. You know, I wasn't sure I would. She looked at Daniel. But then, someone wonderful showed up. The little girl sounded curious. Who? Olivia looked across the table. A daddy who taught me that the best gifts don't come wrapped in expensive paper. They arrive holding flowers. Daniel immediately lowered his head. Embarrassed, Grace smiled. She'd never seen Olivia speak with so much warmth. Lily giggled. My daddy says flowers make sad people smile. Olivia laughed softly. Your daddy is a very wise man. Then the little girl said something that made Olivia's heart stop. My daddy also says that lonely people don't need presents. They need company. Olivia looked at Daniel. He smiled sheepishly. I might have said something like that. She nodded slowly. You were right. Just then, the ballroom doors opened again. Everyone instinctively turned. A tall man stood quietly in the doorway. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just jeans, a simple jacket, and uncertainty on his face. Grace looked toward Olivia, then back at the man. Her eyes widened. She whispered, Olivia, he's here. Grace's voice was barely a whisper, but Olivia heard every word. Slowly, almost afraid the moment would disappear if she moved too quickly, she turned her wheelchair toward the entrance, standing beneath the crystal chandeliers, hands buried nervously inside the pockets of his jacket. Was Ethan. For 8 years, she had imagined this reunion 1,000 different ways. She'd pictured herself rehearsing speeches, explaining, apologizing, begging. Instead, neither of them knew what to say. The ballroom became completely silent. Even the waiters stopped clearing plates. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Not with words, not with movement, not even with breathing. Ethan took one slow step forward, then another. He looked older than Olivia remembered. A few streaks of gray had begun appearing in his dark hair. There were faint lines around his eyes, not from age, from life. For a brief second, Olivia didn't see the 40-year-old man standing before her. She saw the little boy who used to run into her office, carrying drawings she'd been too busy to notice. Hi, Mom. The words were simple, ordinary, but after 8 years, they sounded extraordinary. Olivia smiled through tears. Hi, my boy. Ethan laughed quietly. You still call me that. I always will. He looked down. I wasn't sure if I should come. Olivia nodded. I know. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes. He smiled awkwardly. I nearly drove away 3 times. Daniel quietly stood. I should give you two some privacy. Before he could step away, Olivia gently reached for his sleeve. No, Daniel looked surprised. I'd like you to stay. Why? She smiled warmly. Because if you hadn't shown up tonight, neither would he. Ethan looked toward Daniel for the first time. You must be the man with the flowers. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I guess that's me. Ethan walked over and extended his hand. Thank you. Daniel blinked. For what? For reminding my mother. That kindness still exists. Then he smiled. And reminding me that tomorrow doesn't always come. Daniel looked confused. Ethan noticed. My mom used to tell me she'd make time tomorrow. He glanced at Olivia. I spent years waiting. Then he looked at Daniel. But when I saw the news tonight, I realized I was doing the exact same thing. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? I kept telling myself, I'll call her tomorrow. I'll visit next month. I'll let Lily meet her someday. He laughed bitterly. I became the person I was angry at. Olivia quietly lowered her eyes. No, you became someone who was hurting. Ethan looked at her. You still defend me. She smiled softly. That's a mother's job. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Years of silence couldn't disappear in a single conversation. But something had changed. Neither of them was trying to win. They were trying to understand. Finally, Ethan knelt beside Olivia's wheelchair. He reached into the pocket of his jacket. I brought you something. He carefully unfolded a faded piece of paper. The edges were worn, the folds nearly torn apart. Olivia frowned. What is it? You gave this to me when I was 10. He handed it to her. Olivia slowly opened the paper. The moment she saw it, she covered her mouth. It was a handwritten letter, one she'd completely forgotten. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm probably working too much again. One day, when this company is finally stable, I promise we'll travel the world together. We'll go fishing. We'll watch baseball games. We'll eat too much ice cream. And I'll never miss another birthday. Love, Mom. Her hands trembled. I wrote this. You did. I forgot. Ethan smiled sadly. I didn't. I carried it everywhere. She looked at him in disbelief. For all these years, he nodded. Not because I believed the promise. He paused, but because I believed the person who wrote it. Olivia broke down completely. I failed you. Ethan gently took her hand. Yes. She looked at him through tears. But he squeezed her hand. You're here now. The ballroom remained silent. No one wanted to interrupt a moment that felt bigger than birthdays, bigger than business, even bigger than forgiveness. Ethan smiled. You know, Lily has been asking to meet you for months. Olivia laughed through her tears. Really? She keeps asking one question. What? He smiled. Does Grandma know how to make pancakes? The entire room laughed. Even Olivia. I don't, she admitted, but I know someone who does. Everyone turned toward Daniel. He pointed to himself. Me. Olivia grinned. You came here carrying flowers. I have a feeling you know your way around a kitchen too. Daniel laughed. My pancakes are famous, according to one very biased 8-year-old. Grace suddenly cleared her throat. There may be one small problem. Everyone looked at her. She smiled. The birthday cake, the enormous 6-foot cake, still stood untouched. Its candles had burned low. Its decorations remained perfect. Grace looked around the ballroom. I think it's finally time. The staff began gathering around. The musicians picked up their instruments once more, not because they were hired to, because they wanted to. As the first notes of Happy Birthday began to fill the ballroom, the massive entrance doors slowly opened again. This time, not for executives, not for politicians, not for celebrities, but for dozens of ordinary people. Janitors, receptionists, security guards, kitchen staff, maintenance workers. Word had spread throughout the building that the celebration was finally beginning. And one by one, they came carrying something no amount of money could ever buy. Their time, that was all they brought. No expensive gifts, no designer watches, no rare paintings, no envelopes filled with money. Just the one thing every busy person claims they never have enough of: time. The first to enter was an elderly janitor named Frank. He'd worked in Olivia's headquarters for nearly 26 years. He held a small paper gift bag. The handles had been tied together with blue ribbon. He looked embarrassed. I hope I'm not interrupting." Olivia smiled warmly. "You could never interrupt." Frank slowly walked over. "I heard you were finally celebrating." He handed her the little bag. "It's not much." Olivia carefully opened it. Inside was a small ceramic coffee mug, hand-painted, slightly uneven. Across the front, someone had written in blue letters, "Choose kindness." Olivia looked up. "It's beautiful." Frank smiled shyly. "My granddaughter painted it. She wanted you to have something made with hands instead of money." Olivia gently ran her fingers over the mug. For reasons she couldn't explain, it meant more to her than gifts worth millions. Then came Maria, one of the cafeteria cooks. She carried a small container wrapped in aluminum foil. "I know you probably eat fancy food." She laughed nervously. "But I baked your favorite apple pie." Olivia blinked. "My favorite." Maria nodded. "You always ordered it on Fridays." Olivia looked surprised. "You remembered that?" Maria smiled. "You remembered my husband's surgery. You paid for it. You probably forgot." "I didn't." One by one, people kept arriving. A receptionist, a maintenance technician, a mailroom clerk, a young intern, an elevator operator. None of them wore expensive suits. None of them appeared on magazine covers. But every one of them carried something from the heart. Homemade cookies, a handwritten birthday card, a knitted blanket, fresh vegetables from someone's garden, a framed photograph of the headquarters taken at sunrise. Tiny gifts made priceless because someone had taken the time to think about her. Olivia couldn't stop smiling. She looked at Grace. "I've spent years sitting in rooms full of powerful people." Grace nodded. "I know." Olivia looked around the ballroom. I don't think I've ever felt this rich. Daniel quietly watched everything unfold. He'd expected an awkward dinner. Instead, he was watching strangers become family. He suddenly felt a tiny tug on his sleeve. He looked down. Grace was smiling. "You should probably call Sophie." Daniel frowned. "What for?" "I think she'd like to know. She accidentally started all of this." Daniel laughed. He pulled out his phone. Within seconds, a familiar little face appeared on the screen. "Daddy, hey, sweetheart. Did the birthday lady like the flowers?" Daniel turned the phone toward Olivia. "I think you should ask her." Olivia smiled at the screen. "They're the most beautiful flowers I've ever received." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Really? Really? I picked the blue ones." "I know. My daddy said blue makes people feel peaceful." Olivia laughed softly. "Your daddy was right." Sophie grinned. "Did lots of people come?" The ballroom suddenly became quiet. Everyone looked at Olivia. She smiled. "They did." Sophie clapped excitedly. "I knew they would." Daniel smiled. "Why were you so sure?" His daughter shrugged. "Because once one person is brave enough to be kind, other people stop being scared." The room fell silent. No one expected such wisdom from an 8-year-old. Frank quietly wiped his eyes. The musicians looked at one another. Even Ethan smiled. Children had a way of explaining life without making it complicated. Olivia looked around the ballroom, then stood still for a moment. Something suddenly occurred to her. She looked at David, the television crew. David nodded. "They're still here." She smiled. "Good." He looked confused. "You want the cameras now?" She nodded. "Yes." The reporters quickly moved into position. One of them asked, "Ms. Bennett, would you like to make a statement about the guests who never came?" Olivia looked toward the empty tables, then toward the tables now filled with laughter. She smiled. "No." The reporter frowned. "No, I don't want to talk about the people who stayed away." She looked toward Frank. "Maria, Daniel, Grace, the musicians, the kitchen staff, her son, the ordinary people filling the ballroom. I'd rather talk about the people who showed up." The cameras began rolling. Millions would eventually watch what happened next. Olivia took a slow breath, then said, "For years, I believed success was measured by the number of powerful people who knew my name." She smiled. "Tonight, I discovered something better." She looked directly into the camera. "When my life was perfect, my calendar was full. When my life fell apart, my phone became quiet." She paused. "But tonight, a single father carrying flowers reminded me that one genuine heart is worth more than 1,000 important contacts." The ballroom erupted into applause, not because it sounded like a good speech, because every person in the room knew it was true. Just then, one of the reporters looked down at his phone. His eyes widened. He whispered to another cameraman. Within seconds, every reporter in the ballroom was staring at the same notification. Grace frowned. "What is it?" One reporter slowly looked up. His expression had completely changed. "Ms. Bennett, I think you're going to want to see this." The reporter slowly turned his phone around. Everyone leaned closer. On the screen, the same news website that had mocked Olivia less than 2 hours earlier had just published a new headline: "Breaking: the birthday that restored our faith in humanity." Below it was a photograph, not of empty chairs, not of loneliness, not of humiliation, but of Olivia, laughing, Daniel standing beside her, a bouquet of simple flowers in her hands. Employees gathered around the table, musicians smiling, kitchen staff clapping, her son standing behind her. It looked less like a corporate event and more like a family reunion. The article had already been shared hundreds of thousands of times. People weren't talking about the billionaire anymore. They were talking about the single father. One reporter smiled. "The whole country wants to know who he is." Daniel nearly choked on his drink. "Me," the reporter nodded. "They're calling you the man with the flowers." Daniel laughed nervously. "I just came to a birthday." The reporter smiled. "That's exactly why people care." He looked around the ballroom. In a world where everyone else found an excuse, "You simply showed up." Another reporter turned toward Olivia. "Ms. Bennett, what would you like people to remember about tonight?" Olivia looked around the ballroom. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly wheeled herself toward the enormous birthday cake. The candles had been lit once more. Everyone instinctively gathered around. Grace smiled. "I think it's finally time." The musicians began playing, not because anyone asked them to, because they wanted to. Soon, every voice in the ballroom joined together. "Happy birthday." For the first time in years, Olivia wasn't listening to applause. She was listening to people. Real people. People who expected nothing from her. People who weren't there for influence, or business, or money. They were there because another human being deserved not to be alone. When the song ended, Olivia looked at the candles, then closed her eyes. Grace smiled. "Make a wish." Olivia opened her eyes again. "I already got it." Without another word, she blew out every candle. The ballroom erupted into applause. A few moments later, one of the reporters asked Daniel, "So, what made you come tonight?" Daniel looked embarrassed. "I don't think it's a very exciting answer. We'd still like to hear it." He smiled. "I almost didn't come." Everyone looked surprised. "I worked a double shift yesterday. My feet hurt. My truck barely started this morning. I figured someone else would show up." He looked toward Olivia. "Then Sophie asked me one question." He smiled. She said, "Dad, what if everyone thinks someone else is going?" The ballroom became completely silent. Daniel shrugged. "So, I came." The reporters quickly wrote the sentence down. Several of them looked at one another. One quietly said, "That's the headline." Olivia smiled. "No." Everyone looked at her. She turned toward Daniel. "The headline isn't that he came." She looked around the room. "The headline is what happened after." She slowly looked at every face in the ballroom. One man showed kindness, then another, and before anyone realized it, an empty ballroom became full. She turned toward the cameras. "If you're watching this, and you've been waiting for someone else to make the first move. Don't be the first to forgive, the first to call, the first to visit, the first to apologize, the first to knock on someone's door. She smiled warmly. You'll be amazed how many people were simply waiting for someone else to begin. The room stood in complete silence, not because people didn't know what to say, because there was nothing left to add. The lesson had already been spoken. Olivia slowly wheeled herself toward Daniel. She looked at the bouquet, still resting beside her chair. Then, without warning, she held it back out to him. Daniel looked confused. I gave those to you. She smiled. I know. He laughed. Then why are you giving them back? She gently placed them in his hands. Because one day, I want Sophie to know, those flowers didn't just save a birthday. They gave a lonely woman her family back. Daniel looked toward Ethan. Ethan smiled. I think she's right. He glanced at his mother. I almost missed another tomorrow. Then he looked at Daniel. Thank you for reminding me that some phone calls can't wait. Before anyone could say another word, a tiny voice echoed from Daniel's phone. Daddy. He looked down. Sophie was still on the video call. Yes, sweetheart. Did the birthday lady smile? Daniel turned the phone toward Olivia. She wasn't just smiling. She was laughing. The kind of laugh that comes from a heart that's finally stopped hurting. Daniel smiled back at his daughter. She did. Sophie grinned. I told you flowers help. Daniel chuckled. They did. But you know what helped even more? What? He looked around the ballroom one last time. Showing up. Years later, business magazines would still write about Olivia Bennett's billion-dollar company. Financial analysts would still study her success, but none of those achievements became the story people remembered most. The story that lived on was the birthday where hundreds of invited guests stayed home, and one exhausted single father carrying an ordinary bouquet of flowers reminded an entire nation that the richest people in the world are not the ones with the most money. They're the ones who never let another person celebrate life alone.